Да, так что замечательно. Я считаю, что это будет все хорошо. Я с радостью представляю наших друзей. Это люди с одной церкви. Нашли они нас на интернете, в базе данных церквей Южно-Баптистской конвенции. Дело в том, что Майк и его жена, вы видели их домик, они приехали. Они были у нас в апреле, посмотрели, познакомились с нами, и теперь они приехали со своими друзьями, Дэвид и Кэрол. Они приехали для этого преподавания этого семинара. Они все диаконы в своей церкви из Техаса. Церковь молодая, современная, большая, называется церковь Oak Ridge Baptist Church, right? И находится она в Техасе, как я сказал, в городе Спринг. Вот такие вот дела. Это люди для меня большой пример. I'm going to say some good words about you, so it's good you're not understanding what I'm saying. So you keep you keep modest and просто для меня это пример хороших людей. Это люди, хороших христиан. Это люди, которые на пенсии, которые могли спокойно просто играть в гольф, но они ездят по миссиям, работают своими руками, ездят за границей, в Литве и здесь по Америке. Так что для меня это большое благословение, начало этих отношений, начало дружбы, потому что они большой пример. Они служат церкви и служат за церковью. Такие вот дела. Так что для меня это большая радость. Вот такие дела. Значит, у нас сегодня будет 2 урока и завтра 2 урока. Хорошо, как вы знаете. У нас сегодня 2 урока и завтра 2 урока. Okay, who is going first? David, you can go up here and we're going to pray that everything goes nice and smooth. Спасибо тебе, Господь, за эту встречу сегодня, за то, что Ты наш Бог, Господь нашей жизни. Мы, Господи, рады знакомству с нашими американцами. Мы рады, Господь, возможности утвердиться в вере. Мы рады возможности быть вместе и трудиться для Твоего Царствия. Я благодарю Тебя, Господь, благодарю Тебя за то, что Ты Бог великий, Бог над нами, за Твое провидение, за Твой промысел в нашей жизни. Господи, я прошу Тебя, чтобы Дух Святой был здесь, наполнил это место, наполнил нас. Господи, чтобы Ты здесь присутствовал и царствовал. Благослови нас. Аминь. Аминь, аминь. Значит, позволим им прочитать такую короткую лекцию. После этого у меня есть вопросы. Мы по столам обсудим эти вопросы, дадим свои ответы. Хорошо? Будет возможность задать свои вопросы. И потом что-то перекусим, и потом вторая лекция. Хорошо? Кому нужно переводить, я буду переводить. Кому нужны наушники, я возьму. Okay, it's all yours.
Thank you, Yuri. Appreciate you guys inviting us here. We're very honored and blessed to be part of your congregation this weekend. And we just hope, it's our hope and desire that the Lord speaks to you through us. And it's not our words, but His. A little bit about me. I'm married to that wonderful lady over there, Carol, for 39 years, 39 plus. I was born and raised in a Christian church, lived on the north side of Houston. Was baptized when I was 12 years old at an old Baptist revival down in Lake Jackson, Texas, right on the beach. We got married, and this is no fault of hers, of course, but we got married and we kind of fell away from the church. You know, you get married, you have kids, you work, and you kind of fall away from the church. But through our faith with each other and the fact that we had 3 screaming kids, we had to figure out some way to get those kids in church. So we landed at Oak Ridge Baptist Church. We have history here. Right after we graduated from college in Texas, we moved to Englewood, Colorado, where I was a police officer for 6 years. We got homesick, and we moved back to Houston, where I was a Houston police officer for almost 30 years. So I've been a police officer all my life. That's really kind of what I knew, what I went to college for. So I retired from the police department, the Houston Police Department, in 2012. And I teach part-time at Sam Houston State University there, so in Huntsville, Texas. So that's a little bit about me. Carol will tell you a little bit about her when she comes up after I'm done. I love these topics that Yuri gave us. I love these topics that Erie gave us because a lot of times, oftentimes, non-believers, unbelievers, or folks with questions have these types of questions. So it's really important that we know as Christians what these answers are, and sometimes they even help us. And one of the most common questions that I think we get is, why does God allow tragedy and suffering? Well, what are some examples of tragedy and suffering? Natural disasters. Texas, floods are very common. Hurricanes, very common. Kansas, Colorado, I think tornadoes are very common. We have those man-made disasters. But we have natural disasters, but man-made disasters. What's a man-made disaster? Give me an example of that. I'll ask you guys a lot of questions in my few minutes. What's some examples of a man-made disaster? War, exactly. Terrorism. Yeah, Mike. Oil spill, sure. So there's a lot of tragedy and suffering in those things. But a little bit closer to home, illness. Cancer, many of us are touched by cancer, either directly or indirectly. A loss of job, a loss of income, loss of a spouse, either through death or a child, divorce. All of these things certainly are tragic. All these things we suffer. So why does God allow that? Well, God doesn't, He allows it, but it's important that we understand, if you'll hit that next slide, it's important that we understand that God is not the architect. God is not the person that says we're going to have a natural disaster. We're going to have a man-made disaster. It's not God's idea. What was God's plan? The Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, His plan was for perfection. His plan was perfection. As a matter of fact, Genesis 1:4, Genesis 1:10, Genesis 1:12, Genesis 1:21, 25, and 31, all the time during the creation, what does God say? This is good. God says this is good. And when He made man, Adam and Eve, He said this is very good. So God is not the architect of tragedy. He's not the architect of suffering. And a lot of times when people ask us these questions, that's really what they're really saying. Why God's the architect of this? And no, He's not. We know this in Genesis. But what else we know? There is tragedy. There is suffering. So it's there. So God does allow it. So that brings us now to our question. Why would a loving God allow tragedy and suffering in our life? Who wants to give it a shot? What do you think? Why would He do this? It's a tough question. Anybody? Sure, okay, great. That's my answer number 2. So you're jumping ahead. You've seen my lesson plan. Okay, all right. Well, let's look at the first reason. You will have suffering in your life, and I think it's important that we know that. John says, I have told you, now this is Jesus talking, I have told you these things. Okay, what are these things? If you go right before John 16:33, Jesus is telling His disciples, He's talking to His disciples here. Jesus is saying, I'm leaving. I'm going to the kingdom. I'm going to my Father. And now I've told you these things because so that in me you may have peace. You will have suffering. It's not if, you will have suffering. I used to teach ethics to the police cadets, and I would tell them every class, it's not a matter of if you're going to be faced with an ethical dilemma, when you will be faced with an ethical dilemma. So you will have suffering. This is from Jesus talking to His disciples. You will have suffering. So what's one of the reasons? Look at that first reason why God allows suffering. And I'll go ahead and tell you. God allows suffering for 2 reasons. Dave, you with us? There you go. It builds our character. It builds our character. It makes us stronger, and it builds our faith. You can't get any better if you don't have struggles. Think about it. For me, personally, everything that I've learned through my mistakes. Everything. Our marriage is strongest today because of the mistakes that we made as a couple. And our marriage faltered when Jesus was not in the middle of our marriage. And Carol will get an amen out of that all day long from her. Until Jesus is in the middle of our marriage, we struggled. We had tragedies. We had suffering. So it's important that it builds our character. Look at this verse. Well, it reminds me of an old TV series that I used to watch as a kid. It was called The Twilight Zone. Old black and white. Yes, TV used to be black and white. Okay. They're looking, what's a TV? I don't know. It was an old TV series, and this particular TV series episode, this gentleman lived on adrenaline. He lived on the excitement of life, the stress. He was a little criminal, a little thug, is really what he was, but he just had to have something going on in his life every single minute. And he's actually shot and killed by the police in this episode. And he wakes up, and there's an angel standing over him. And the guy says, "Hey, Mr. Angel, what do we do?" And the angel says, "Anything you want to do, whatever you want to do." He robs banks, he robs people. He's really a bad guy, but no one gets in his way. He has no stress, nothing. Everything is going great in his life. And he finally says, "I can't take this. I've got to have stress." So stress is a good thing. Suffering is a good thing for us. Imagine if you broke your arm. Oh, who did? Did you just break your arm? Oh, okay. Look at that. Did it hurt? What would have happened if it didn't hurt? Yeah, exactly. You wouldn't know it. If you broke your arm and it didn't hurt, you wouldn't know you had a broken arm. So pain and suffering is a good thing. God uses it to encourage, to build our faith, to build our character. I love this about James. I love this book because it's all about ethics. James 1, 2, and 3. He says, "Consider it joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance." Consider it joy. What's the joy there? Did you like breaking your arm? No. So when does the joy occur? The joy occurs when we get through it. It's not joyful to go through hard times. It's not easy. It's supposed to be tough. The broken arms are supposed to hurt. Tragedy, illness, these things are supposed to hurt. But James is saying the joy is when we get through it. And here's how we get through it. Jesus Christ. That's how we build our faith on him. We trust in him. That's how we build our faith. He says, your testing of your faith produces endurance. What's endurance? Continuing on. It's not just a one-step thing. It happens. It's always there. I love this about Romans. Val and I were talking earlier today, and I said, man, if there's one guy I want to meet in heaven, it's Paul. I want to meet Paul. He wrote half the New Testament. In Romans, here's what he says. More than that. Now, what he's talking about more than that, what he means right before this in Romans 5, 3 through 5, right before that, he's telling his disciples about how their salvation, justification, how we're justified. He says, more than that, more than your salvation, more than that, we rejoice in our sufferings. Paul wants to rejoice in your sufferings. They're good times. Knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame. because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. So Paul and James and Jesus himself all reiterate this important notion that suffering is important. God allows suffering because it builds our character. And the next one. And then, number 2, she got this one right. It encourages us to trust God. It encourages us to trust God. How about that person that, let's go back to that guy that never had a problem, never had a care in the world. Unfortunately, a lot of Christians today, when do they look to God? When? In bad times, in suffering. Only in suffering do they look to God. It's important that we understand that God is who gets us through the suffering. It's not ourselves. It's not anything that we can do. It's not anything that we have done or can do or are able to do. And I like this, that Paul said this. I love Paul's writings. In 2 Corinthians, he says 12, 7 through 10. It says, kind of lengthy, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself. What's exalting mean? To lift myself up, to everything. It's all about me. It's look at me, look what I've done. To keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in my flesh. Now the thing about that, it's a lot of debate in that verse, in this passage from Paul, because we're not really sure what that thorn is. The thorn could be a physical ailment. It could be a spiritual ailment. It could be a lack of faith ailment, but whatever the thorn is, and it's a different, your thorn might be different than your thorn, and vice versa. We all have our thorns. We all have them. Paul says, it was given to me. Who gave me that thorn? It was given to me. In the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself. Concerning this, I implored the Lord. Paul begged God 3 times. I begged you, please take this thorn from me, God. Please take this ailment from me, this physical, whatever it is, whatever this suffering is, whatever this tragedy is, take it from me. I don't want it. God's response is classic. Here's what the Lord said to Paul. My grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. More gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. God tells him, I'm not taking away that tragedy. I'm not taking away that suffering. You need that suffering so you can count on me, so you can trust in me, so you can come to me for the end, for the joy, as James said, for the joy that gets you through that suffering. God allows suffering so we can trust him. God allows suffering so it builds our character. God allows suffering to make us closer to him. God allows suffering in the event that when Christians endure suffering, they can help those that are going through the same issues. I'll say one last little story, then I'm going to have my wife Carol come up. I was a police officer, as I said earlier, and every once in a while a police officer has to give death messages. Someone in a family has died and they're out of town, and the other police department will call the local police department to go give the family the news. And I've done this twice in my career. It was painfully obvious to me which family was the Christian family and which family was not. The other family was angry and they threw things, and they cussed each other, and the Christian family, certainly they were upset. Certainly they were saddened. But it uplifted me to see how they took that, and it was a blessing to me, actually, and I even told them that evening. So God allows suffering. Suffering's not a bad thing because the joy is on the other end of that. So I'm going to bring up my wife now, and she will talk about